This video is brought to you by Squarespace. What is up, guys, and welcome to my ranking of the Planet of the Apes. With the release of Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes this weekend, we now have 10 films in this long-running franchise. One of the longest and most consistently interesting franchises ever created. I mean, 1968 to today, and it's still just as strong today as it was in the 60s.
Take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
So my history with the Planet of the Apes franchise, my dad was always a massive fan of the original movies, so I have seen the original a number of times. I remember he had Conquest of the Planet of the Apes on Laserdisc, so I've seen pieces of that movie throughout my entire life before eventually watching the whole thing and the whole franchise as an adult. And I absolutely adore the recent trilogy from the past decade. And if you have not already seen, I did do a full review for Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, which I enjoyed quite a bit. And if you want my full in-depth thoughts of that, when I get to that movie, I'll put a card up here for you to click on and get all of my thoughts on Kingdom. With all that being said, guys, we'll kick this bitch off at number 10, which is a movie that I genuinely just am bewildered at and do not enjoy whatsoever, and that is Beneath the Planet of the Apes. This is the second film in the franchise, the direct sequel to the original, and I could see some people liking this for how batshit wild and weird that it gets, but for me, it's the one movie in this franchise that just doesn't make any sense within the canon, and it just tries to go too weird. So you have Taylor, you have Charlton Heston's character from the original film after he has seen the Statue of Liberty. You bastards! Goddamn you!
You maniacs! Damn yous!
He goes off with Nova, he finds this weird invisible wall, falls through it, and then we get a secondary ship that lands with somebody who looks remarkably similar to Charlton Heston, to where I think your average viewer will probably think it's the same character in some kind of a time loop thing. And he basically goes through all of the same events as the original film. He lands, finds the apes, loses his ability to speak, and they take him hostage, and eventually they find out he could speak, and he figures out that Taylor was there, and eventually it all leads to this underground society of telepathic human beings that wear masks and look like Cenobites underneath. Oh, and they worship a nuclear bomb. That's their god. And then Taylor has been hostage underneath here with Nova, and it's fucking weird, okay? It's weird. Again, if you like your sci-fi just batshit crazy and wild, I could see some people liking this one. For me, they just go too far, they go too silly, they go too stupid, and this is a film that I do not enjoy rewatching. Coming in at number 9 is gonna be Tim Burton's remake. Now, I enjoyed this as a kid. This might have been the first Planet of the Apes film that I watched. In fact, I know it was. I watched this in theaters with my dad, and I think my uncle as well. And the looks on their faces, even though I was enjoying what was going on as a stupid adolescent, the looks on their faces was like the penguins in Madagascar whenever they finally found Antarctica.
Well, this sucks.
And so it was going to see that with my dad that drove him, almost like a mission from God, that he had to sit me down and show me the original Planet of the Apes. Like, sit your ass down, here's some snacks, now you watch how this shit's supposed to be. Look, admittedly, I'm not a big fan of Tim Burton. I can count on one hand how many of his films I like, and all the other ones that I've seen I don't care for. This would belong in that list. Is it a slick production? Yes. Does the makeup effects on the apes look incredible even to this day? Yes. Do I like a lot of the cast members? Yes. But the movie is just empty. It takes all of the classic appeal of the original and the plot twists and the intrigue, and it just tries to put its own spin on it, and it just rings very hollow. I don't think any of the performances are all that great here, despite being actors that I enjoy. Most of that is because the script is not very good. The dialogue, more specifically, is not very good, and it just doesn't have the intensity or the intrigue or the iconic nature that the original films had. And so, is it a digestible, somewhat modern blockbuster? Sure, I could see some people liking it more than me for that value alone, but when I watch it, it just makes me want to watch the original, and that's kind of a telltale sign that your remake's not very good. And what the fuck was up with that ending? If you're gonna do a twist ending and try to outdo the original, which shame on you for even thinking you could do that, no! You gotta at least make your shit make sense, Burton. Come on. Now, really quick before we move on to the top 8, while if you were a human who is imprisoned by the apes, just saying a word out loud is going to make you stand out in the actual real world, you got to do a little bit more to get your voice heard, like making your own website with the sponsor of today's video, Squarespace. Whether you're an entrepreneur or just somebody with a creative drive, having your own website is absolutely crucial to getting your name out there. But if you're like me, you don't know the first thing about web design and wouldn't even know where to start in making your own website. Well, luckily for us, Squarespace is the all-in-one website platform for creatives and entrepreneurs to stand out and succeed online. Squarespace makes it easy to create a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell anything from products to content to your time, all in one place, all on your terms. Squarespace's new Blueprint AI allows you to personalize your new website with a guided design system. Choose from professionally curated layouts and styling options to build the base of your site. You can also upload video content and organize an entire library to showcase your content on a video page, or even sell custom merch for a passive income stream that engages your audience and scales your brand. So if you're ready to break ground on your new website, head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Cody Leach to save 10% off of your first purchase of a website or domain. And thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. Coming in at number 8 is going to be Battle for the Planet of the Apes. And this is one that I see most commonly at the bottom, and I totally understand why. I don't really have an argument for why this is a good film. I just enjoy it more than the two below it. This very much has little elements that eventually became Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, where you have Caesar, who is now risen to be the ruler of the apes, and they live out on their own, and the humans kind of have a fucked up relationship with them. And then you have this gorilla character who is like this military tyrant who very much disagrees with Caesar's outlook on how to treat the humans. And so it creates this very similar dynamic, though not anywhere near as good or compelling as the Caesar-Koba dynamic in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, and it eventually leads to a lot of human bloodshed and eventually leads to an ape bloodshed. Ape shall not kill ape. And so it's essentially a movie where you have the apes finally catching back up with humans and making all of the same mistakes, having all of the same bad outlooks, and kind of having a bit of the same downfall as the humans had that led to the birth of the Planet of the Apes. So I do think that there is some compelling things going on with the story. Is it executed that well? No. Is it a very interesting or satisfying closeout to the original films? No. But for me, it's watchable. It's satisfying enough. I'd rather rewatch it than the other two. Now for context, I would give a positive review to every other movie on this list. It's just the bottom 3 that I'm pretty negative on. Every other movie on this list, I'd be perfectly happy rewatching. And at number 7, we have Escape from the Planet of the Apes, the third film in the original franchise. And what makes this one stand out is that it's very much kind of like a 70s comedy, at least through most of the runtime. And something about that is actually kind of enjoyable, especially if you're watching the movies in order. You have the very trippy sci-fi darkness of the first one, the batshit wild craziness of the second one, and then you get to take a little bit of a breath and have just some lighthearted comedy with Roddy McDowall in the 70s. And I think it has a charm to it. I think having Cornelius and Zira in the 70s, kind of going through the same thing that Taylor did in the original film, where they're a fish out of water and everybody's just perplexed that apes can talk and they're trying on fashion, and eventually things devolve when the humans of the 70s realize these apes are from a future where we kind of get fucked in the ass. We should probably torture them to death. And so very quickly you have a tonal shift in this film from 70s jovial, lighthearted comedy to a very dark and bleak chase film in the third act. And I really enjoy that sharp difference there, because it kind of gets you back on track with the bleakness, the bleak reality, and some of the satire that is very prevalent in the early Planet of the Apes films. It kind of like jolts you back into reality of, oh yeah, I'm watching an Apes movie. This shit's gonna get dark eventually. So I like the story that we go on here, and even though it ends tragic, it leads to movies that I have not talked about yet that I do enjoy quite a bit. Coming in at number 6 is going to be Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. And this, I want to say, was always my dad's favorite, or maybe it's just the one that he watched the most because he had the Laserdisc. But nonetheless, I had seen chunks of this movie so many times throughout my life. Like the whole ending speech that Caesar gives to all the liberated apes might as well have been burnt in my brain before I even saw this film. But Conquest of the Planet of the Apes is very much like the original version of Rise of the Planet of the Apes. For those of you that have just watched the recent movies, where you have Caesar, who was birthed from Cornelius and Zira and was the surviving ape at the end of Escape from the Planet of the Apes, has now been raised to adulthood, and it is a alternate future, at least of the 70s, or is it the past? Time travel gets you fucked up. We're not even going to get into all that. But it's an alternate place in history where there's this virus that has taken out all of the cats and dogs of the world. So now apes have risen to be the prominent household pet of humans. And so you have all the apes that are not smart, that are not on the intellect level of Caesar, who are essentially slaves. And all throughout the movie, it's about the rise of Caesar and him liberating all of the apes to take over what will become the Planet of the Apes. It's a much darker chapter, especially from Escape from the Planet of the Apes, but even compared to the first two in certain ways, especially with a lot of the slave imagery and things like that, it's just a deeper movie. And I think that having Roddy McDowall return to play Caesar was a good choice. I've always heard the complaint that him looking exactly like Cornelius is a little bit of an uncanny valley, but he was his father. Is it really that big of a deal? I love Roddy McDowall, Fright Night Forever, baby. So I love having him here as Caesar. He does a good job. It is a dated performance, but he does a very good job with what was required back in the 70s. And I just like the story of having Caesar be this war hero that has to rise to prominence and liberate his people from these evil humans and literally kick off the Planet of the Apes. Kick off the events that's going to loop back to the events of the first film that introduced us to this world. Coming in at number 5, we have the new dog, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. And in my review, I did say that this movie is probably going to age very well, and when I get the subsequent movies, the rest of what I assume would be a planned trilogy, I could see myself very easily moving this up the list. But as of right now, this is where it's going, and I enjoyed this movie quite a bit. I was cautiously optimistic about it, because I love the previous 3 films so much, and they felt like such a perfect cohesive trilogy with a great beginning, middle, and end. Why fuck with that? But they had a really good idea to take us hundreds of years into the future and have Caesar's legacy and his legend be kind of the main story focus of this new world, this new future version of the Planet of the Apes that we have been introduced to over the last decade. And I think that that works really well. It brings some really interesting exploration of how somebody's words and teachings and their legend can be twisted by different people to mean different things, and to be very good and noble in one person's hands and be very evil and manipulative in somebody else's hands. I think that all of the motion capture and the CGI is absolutely on par with what we've come to expect from these movies. It's a very fun, exciting, adventure-style film. I think that anybody that likes these newer Apes films is going to enjoy this. You might not enjoy it as much as the previous 3. Clearly, I did not, but I did really like it, and I am on board for where we're going in the future. Coming in at number 4, we have the original Planet of the Apes. Now, of course, this movie is very dated. It is of its time. Can it hold a candle to the scale and the excitement and the immersion of the modern Planet of the Apes films? No, it cannot. But I still respect and love the hell out of what they were able to achieve with this film back in 1968. It very much feels like a classic Twilight Zone episode pulled out to full feature length. And I believe Roddy... And you could feel Rod Serling all over the writing of this movie. I think it's a really interesting, old-school sci-fi film. It's known as having one of the best twist shock endings of all time. And if you're one of the 7 people left on planet Earth that doesn't know the ending of this film, I still think it would pack quite a bit of a punch if you watched it today for the first time. Again, old school stuff, but love what Charlton Heston does with his character, love what Roddy McDowall and a lot of the Apes actors do with their characters. The makeup for the time was very convincing, and they're able to emote quite a bit with this very primitive movie special effects. And it's just one of those classic sci-fis that kind of rubs shoulders with horror a little bit, where you see one of the astronauts stuffed in a museum and the implications of the ending of the film. It's got a dark edge to it that kind of sneaks in there. And so I've always loved this movie. I've always respected it. And it's one that I think still needs to be very high on this list for what it kicked off and how much it still holds up today. Coming in at number 3 is going to be War for the Planet of the Apes. And This is a complicated movie for me because while I think narratively it's a very good closeout to this trilogy, and I think it's the most emotionally devastating of the three, maybe of the entire franchise, I mean, it is a gut punch of a movie over and over and over again. And so the only negative that I can hail against it for why I would have it at number 3, not that that really needs to be justified in a list of 10, is that because it's so dark and bleak and brutal, it's not nearly as rewatchable as the other two films in that trilogy. There's actually been times where I've gotten the itch to watch these movies again, and I watch Rise, and I watch Dawn, and then I stop. Something that can be said for the entire top 3 is the CGI, the motion capture, the performances of the actors. Primarily, Andy Serkis is just top-notch. I mean, it's generation defining. That's how good that it is. And what I like about this story is that it's kind of an unexpected direction. When you see Rise and then you see how they expanded things with Dawn, I certainly did not expect this movie to go the directions that it did when I walked into the theater. It kind of goes back to the storyline of the first film, Rise, in certain ways, where it's yet again about the apes being imprisoned and about them having to look to Caesar for inspiration and him yet again rise to be the leader and to inspire and to kind of give people life again in this horrid situation. You got a great villain played by Woody Harrelson. That guy is just awesome at playing a fucking creep, and he doesn't get like a ton of screen time, but when he's there, he's genuinely like unnerving. Like when you first see him with the waterfall after he's killed Caesar's family and just that look that he gives when he turns around with the camo and they lock eyes for the first time, like you get chills. Like he just looks like a monster. And so I really do enjoy this film. And Bad Ape is absolutely a standout. I love Steve Zahn, always have. And I think that character is one of the best utilizations of comedic relief in any modern blockbuster. For a movie that's so dark and emotionally devastating, you would think there's no room for humor. But the moments that you get Steve Zahn as Bad Ape absolutely cuts the tension in the best possible way in times that you desperately need it. So this is a really good movie that, just because of the implications of the story and how heavy it is, I don't rewatch it near as much as the two above it and even a couple below it. Coming in at number 2 is going to be Rise of the Planet of the Apes. And I remember being one of those people who, I think most of us belong to this group, initially heard about this film and said, why? What the fuck are you gonna do? Like, did you see how Burton just shit the bed a couple of years ago? What's the point? What are you gonna do with the Planet of the Apes franchise now? And then you heard they're gonna do fully CGI monkeys, and you're like, oh yeah, we're really there technologically, and we'll see how this train wreck goes. And my God, I don't know if I've eaten my words with a movie harder than Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Such an incredible movie, such a great story, amazing CGI. I mean, it gets much better after this with Dawn and War, but even with Rise is very convincing, and the motion capture performance of Andy Serkis, and a movie there he's not able to have much dialogue in the film. He only has like 2 lines, and so you don't get quite the personality that you get in the second and third film, and yet they still get you to buy into this character and emotionally latch into Caesar so hard because of the physical performance and the things that this character goes through. James Franco, I think, does an incredible job in this movie too. Was always a big fan of him. I say was because it doesn't look like we're ever going to see him in movies again. John Lithgow, love seeing that guy show up. Another very sympathetic role from him. You look at things like the Trinity Killer, and then you look at things like this, and you're just like, dude, the range this guy has is off the charts. Really good action sequences that take place during the third act. I mean, this is just a movie that's incredible. And it was so good that you walk out of this and you think, there's no way they're going to follow this up and match this. Like, there's just no way. And I'll be damned, they did it. Which leads me to my number 1, which is Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. A movie that is absolutely one of my favorites of all time. It's probably in my top 10, top 15 movies of all time. I adore Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. Like I said, walking out of Rise on cloud 9, thinking there's no way they're going to follow this up in a way that's going to match what they just gave us. And Dawn, to me, is almost like twice the movie that Rise is. The way that the CGI and the motion capture evolved here, and you have Andy Serkis' performance that's able to breathe a lot more because he's able to vocalize a lot more. You have Toby Kebbell do an incredible job in a performance that honestly doesn't get near the credit that it deserves. I think he does just as good of a job as Andy Serkis with the character of Koba, who is such an integral piece of this story. Somebody who is this brutal, take-no-shit villain, but you kind of understand why. Like, you get the way that his mind thinks with how he has been mistreated and tortured and just brutalized by humans throughout most of his life, why he would not understand, that would not stand for Caesar being more sympathetic as somebody who had the opposite, was very much nurtured by humanity. And so it creates this really incredible dynamic between the protagonist and his second in command, who evolves to be the main villain of the film. I also love the human characters in here, where you get a very sympathetic motivation from them. And aside from one character who's way too overcooked, just the human that is not going to listen, is going to fuck everything up for everybody, I thought that guy was a little too much. That's the one knock that I have on this film. Aside from him, all the other human characters, you totally get where they're coming from. Even Gary Oldman, who through the first 2 acts of the film is kind of framed to be the main antagonist of the movie. There's nothing evil about what he wants to do. There's nothing that is an off motivation about what he wants, about why he doesn't trust the apes, about what he wants to do to make sure that humanity survives and ensure the survival of the human race. Like, he's a villain-ish that you get very much behind, and you're like, I know I'm supposed to hate this guy because I'm Caesar's boy, but he's making some good fucking points. And the way that you have just this very almost Shakespearean chain of events with Caesar and the apes getting introduced to these humans. And when they all show up outside of the human little barricade and the gates open and all these apes are on horses with spears. Apes do not want war! Like, there's so many sequences where you're just like, holy fuck, this shit's awesome! Leading to one of the most intense and emotionally satisfying showdowns in the third act at the top of that tower between Caesar, who had an attempted assassination, is now rose back to be the leader, almost from beyond the dead, to take out Koba. God, I love this movie. I'm gonna fucking watch it again right now. Nonetheless, I adore this movie. I live this movie. This movie is a part of me. That's how much I enjoy it, and it is absolutely, without a doubt, my pick for best of the Planet of the Apes franchise. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all of my 2024 new release reviews. I'm also going to put my full review of Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes for you to check out. Please be sure to check out Squarespace down in the video description below, and like, share, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything in the future. Now, please, as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.